If you're here for a stewardship conversation, you're in the wrong place tonight. This is the meet and greet for Stephanie Anderson, and we're delighted you're here tonight. I want to invite Mary to come forward, and Mary is one of our call committee members, and she's going to open us in a word of prayer.
My name is Mary, like he mentioned, and our call committee often started our meetings with a grounding or centering activity. That purpose is to sort of wipe your neurological slate, reboot that reptile brain from a busy day to do the work. And in the interest of that, I would like you to all stand before we pray. And stand about hip width apart and put all your weight back on your heels and dig your heels into the ground. Gotcha, on your heels. And now hold all your toes up in the air and grasp the ground with your toes. Pick them up again and grasp the ground with your toes, all the while keeping your weight anchored in your heels. Keeping in mind our call committee often met in the summer, and we did this with bare feet. All right, this time, pick up your big toe, second toe, middle toe, fourth toe, pinky, and curl them down in reverse order. Middle toe, second toe, big toe. The purpose is not to do it, it's to shift your brain off of the roads and everything else you thought about to what we're doing here tonight. Do it one more time, big.
Okay, back to the reptile brain. I'm going to say just a couple words here. I was told by my wife to keep it short, but that's hard to do. My name is Douglas Berg-Williams. I'm the chair of the call committee. I think all of our call committee members are here tonight. Jenny, Chris, Mary, of course, Pastor Jason, Nancy, and Luke, and April. Is that everybody? I think I got everybody. All right. So thanks for coming tonight to this meet and greet session for Deacon Stephanie Anderson. When the call committee convened last June, Pastor Jason promised us a quick process saying we would definitely be done calling someone by the end of summer.
Rookie mistake.
As we prayed and deliberated over candidates and conducted multiple interviews, Bishop Lull told us we would know we had the right person when he or she came along. We would not need to convince each other, we would know. The bishop is always right, we know. We read Deacon Stephanie's rostered minister profile, and we were blown away by the richness of her experience working in the church, at the church's threshold, and out in the community. One committee member said she started reading the profile in her car while waiting to pick up her kids. She said she couldn't put it down. Another member was ready to text her a job offer on the spot. We had to interview Stephanie stat. Pastor Jason met with her first to make sure he could see himself working with her. He was very enthusiastic. I was struck by Stephanie's rostered minister profile opening statement, and I quote, "My call is at the threshold of church and world, faithfully offering one to the other. This call is rooted in God's mission for the world, leading me towards borders and boundaries, living into my most authentic self when accompanying those at the margins." I thought of the parallels between the threshold of church and world and Augustana's mission theme, where faith meets life. The threshold of church and world is where we strive to exist. We live our lives where faith meets life. We bring our faith to our friends and neighbors, to our coworkers, and everyone we interact with every day. We are constantly talking about how to make church more relevant outside the doors of Augustana in our neighborhood. And then we met Deacon Stephanie in a couple of interviews and ongoing conversations. We all feel she is an ideal fit for Augustana in this moment. Jenny's going to come up and say a couple words.
Hi, I'm Jenny Sanford, and I'm just going to share a little bit about Deacon Stephanie. Deacon Stephanie is from Maplewood, where her parents still live. She grew up in Roseville Lutheran, and like a good Lutheran kid, She was involved with everything from church camp to campus ministry, from playing guitar in the Concordia College Worship Band to leading youth at Boisier's Lutheran Ministry Camp. She studied communications at Concordia Moorhead and then earned a Master's of Arts in Ministerial Studies from the Lutheran School of Theology in Chicago. After seminary, Deacon Stephanie worked for the ELCA in Chicago as a manager for Young Adults in Global Mission, or YAGM. Here she, I got that right, okay. Yeah. Here she worked with young adults throughout their global mission experiences. She then worked at the University of Minnesota as an education abroad manager, doing similar work, but in a secular university setting. She spoke about how the students in these programs saw her as the interface between the spiritual life of the church and the outside world. Within the wider ELCA, she serves on several boards of directors and the Synod Steering Committee for Young Adult Internship Program. She is also currently the director for Gather, a young adult ministry that brings together young adults of diverse backgrounds from across the Twin Cities. This group offers fellowship, worship, and volunteer experiences. Since 2019, Deacon Stephanie has served at St. Andrew's Lutheran Church, where she was charged with building smaller experiences of the community, where people can feel connected to one another and to God. She leads the new member ministries and Christian discipleship and education. Stephanie currently lives in Coon Rapids with her husband Josiah and her bonus children, Eve and Freddie.
The call committee is really impressed with many of Stephanie's skills and passions for ministry that make it easy to see how she will fit in with the leadership of Augustana. These are just a few of the things that stand out among the many. Building a sense of community is one of Deacon Stephanie's top ministry gifts. At St. Andrew's, she thrives on carving out smaller groups whose care of each other multiplies the ways community is formed. She leads the new member ministries in Christian discipleship and education. She began St. Andrew's young adult ministry geared towards 19 to 35-year-olds. She has made space for the young adults in the church that has traditionally focused on older adults and the very young, but not typically the millennials and the Gen Zers, Generation Zers. She has embraced this threshold between church and the world by working with the young adults, helping them find Christian community and conversation. She has thrived working with this elusive age group. Deacon Stephanie said her favorite part of worship is preaching and collaborating in the planning of meaningful music for the service. She said, "The worship experience is what we are all about." She states, "Worship should be polished and not perfected, and everyone can participate." She may be asking for more amateur trombone playing in church. She is excited about having expanded opportunities to preach and lead worship here at Augustana. She told us she may be the most excited about serving a larger role in pastoral care. Not just visiting people in their homes, but also holding newborn babies, counseling families, and ensuring new members feel welcome. Administration is one of Deacon Stephanie's fortes. She sees herself as a project manager, landing the plane amidst strategic visioning and big thinking. At St. Andrews, she is often called in to project manage programs outside her ministry focus area. Pastor Jason said he would appreciate working with someone who loves managing the details. The call committee strongly believes Deacon Stephanie is the best person for this position. She will be an excellent partner with Pastor Jason in leading the reinvigorating Augustana into the future. Stephanie is warm, she's personable, she's patient, genuine, and empathetic. She's deeply engaged and ready to grow. Augustana will provide a fertile community to expand her ministry. We believe that she will bring genuine, vital energy to our ministries. She writes, "I speak and preach about God's limitless love for all of humanity. God, in essence, is community. The doctrine of the Trinity tells us that God's very being is that of relationship. and that our call as baptized people of faith is to be in authentic relationship with our neighbor, and therefore with God. Now, let's give Deacon Stephanie a chance to say some more about herself and her ministry, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask her many questions. Please welcome Deacon Stephanie Anderson.
Hi, everyone. Doug and Jenny, that was so kind. And you pretty much covered everything. So thank you for a truly kind and generous introduction. I'm Stephanie Anderson. I serve as a deacon, as a minister of word and service in the ELCA, and I am so thrilled and grateful to be here with all of you tonight. Before I sort of get into who I am and where I've come from, I actually just want to start by telling all of you just how incredible your call committee was from Augustana, and how incredible they were throughout this entire process. You can trust that this team of people not only represented Augustana well, they told stories of this place and they gave good context for what it might mean to be called here, but you can also trust that they did their due diligence and they asked really good and faithful questions, and they communicated really well with those of us who were on the candidate side of this process. So I want to thank them, and I just want you all to know that you can be really proud of what an incredible experience it was for all of us who were candidates at this congregation. And it's been very clear to me through the whole thing that you as a community tend well to your people. And so thank you for tending well to those of us here. I want to do just a couple things in my portion of the evening. The first is to tell you a little bit about who I am. You've heard smatterings of that, and the people and places and ministries that have formed me, because I think that they form who I am as a deacon and how I would show up to this call. In that telling, you will also hear from me about why Augustana and why right now this feels like a good fit for me. And then lastly, Pastor Jason and I together will give a little bit more context for what it might mean for you to call a deacon, knowing that you as a congregation have historically called ministers of word and sacrament as your leaders and as your interns. We will answer your questions and share with you about exactly what it means to be a deacon, but we'll get there. So first, a little bit about me. Again, I grew up in the Twin Cities. My parents live in Maplewood, and my whole life was oriented toward Roseville. So I went to Roseville High School, and Roseville Lutheran Church was my home congregation. I am someone who has always, from an early age, found refuge in the church. I was a kid who spent all of their free time with the youth director and volunteering and doing all things church that I could. My family always jokes that they knew I would be okay when I was 16 years old and I got my driver's license, and the very first place I went was church to show the pastors and show the youth directors. So my involvement in church from a really young age instilled in me the importance and the power of congregational ministry. I know that church doesn't always get it right, in part because it is made up of people in all of their complexity. But I really have experienced church to be a place where we can be relieved from the pressures of the world, and a place that really counters some of the lies the world tells us about our own worthiness and our own goodness. And we can come together and sort of ritualize a belief in a future that is better and different than what we've always known. And I have experienced that in the congregation from a really, really young age. So in my ministry, I am always striving to create those spaces for people to know that they are loved in a deep enough way that it actually transforms their life. So I grew up loving the church, and beyond that, I have been really lucky to have been formed by a whole smattering of Lutheran expressions of the church, many of which were designed for and led by young adults, like we heard from Doug. So when I talk about young adults, which you'll hear me talk about a lot, I'm talking about folks in their 20s and early 30s, this gap that is not always tended to in church spaces. And I was really lucky to be tended to in that season of my life. So I went to Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota. Any Cobbers? And they're, oh, a Cobber, great. And I was really involved in campus ministry there. I played guitar and sang in a worship band there. But my college years were actually most anchored by the summers. And that's because I worked at Voyagers Lutheran Ministry, which is Camp Vermilion and Camp Hiawatha in northern Minnesota. They also have Boundary Waters programming. I spent 2 summers on staff as a counselor and then 2 summers on leadership staff. And camp taught me how to lead. Camp taught me about our Christian call to care for creation. Camp taught me how to play guitar. And camp gave me some of my best friends that I have to this day. And to this day, I serve on the board of Voyagers Lutheran Ministry, this camp, and I feel really strongly about the gift of outdoor ministry, not only to our kiddos who get to go to camp, but for the young adult staff members that spend their summers there, and again, the leadership development that provides. I've also been really formed by the global church. So when I graduated college and finished up those 4 summers at camp, I served for a year as an ELCA missionary in the country of South Africa through a program called Young Adults in Global Mission, or acronymed as YAGM, which is admittedly the worst acronym. But YAGM is a 1-year international service learning opportunity for young adults in the ELCA. And so I served for a year in South Africa, just outside of Cape Town. I lived with a local Lutheran pastor and his wife and their 4-year-old son, and served at the Congregational and an elementary school and a nonprofit organization. And I could talk about what that year meant to me for the rest of the night. So sometime let's talk about it. I want to hear about your travel stories and would love to share more, but essentially this year of service altered the trajectory of the rest of my life. And it gave me a deepened and widened sense of the global church. And I got to witness the community of faith living out their Lutheran faith in some ways that were really similar to my home and some ways that were dramatically different. And then that year in South Africa also, I deepened my commitment to social justice, and again widened my understanding of things like racial privilege and globalization and the impact of HIV and AIDS on struggling communities and all sorts of things during that year. So I will spare you all the details, but I would love to talk about that more someday. When I returned to the US, I moved to Chicago to start seminary. I went to school at the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago. And while I was in seminary, I worked full-time for the Global Mission Unit of the ELCA for the YAGM, Young Adults in Global Mission Program. So that was one of my dream jobs. I got to accompany young adults as we sent them out into the world for a year of service. I got to welcome them back from that year of service and consider all of the ways that would impact the rest of their lives. And I got to travel to many of those places and see the world through the eyes of our Lutheran companions overseas, which was really, really incredible. And I'll get to this later, but I know that you as a congregation are deeply invested in global ministry and in your partners overseas. And so one of the reasons as to why Augustana, that is a very, very clear thing to me, our sort of shared commitment to not only the needs within our walls or the needs outside our doors, but the needs across the world as well. So a lot of my ministry has been geared toward what it looks like to create authentic, deeply Lutheran spaces that are also innovative and responding to the need of the time. And we all help all of us do that, but I have found a particularly powerful voice from our young people and the way that youth and young adults have taught me, and I think continue to teach the church about new and innovative ways to be church in this particular moment of time. I moved back to Minnesota in 2017. I always knew I'd come back to Minnesota and to the Twin Cities. I worked for a couple years at the University of Minnesota in one of their study abroad offices, which was good and interesting in lots of ways, but I knew that I was called back to the church and that I really missed ministry as my profession. So for the past 3.5 years, I have served as the deacon at St. Andrew's Lutheran Church in Matamirai. St. Andrews is a super unique place. They have about 10,000 members. It's the 4th biggest congregation in the ELCA. And I currently work on a clergy team of 8 pastors and deacons. So that means a lot of things. It means that much of our programming is built for the large scale. I've learned so much from these colleagues and this place. And it's been clear to me for a while that I am called to somewhere slightly smaller. I know that you would probably not identify as a small congregation, but compared to where I am, this does feel smaller. And the appeal for that is that I can more deeply know people. And I just love the idea of coming into worship and maybe knowing most, if not all, names of the people who are there. Of course, the large scale comes with lots of opportunities and lots of resources, but I feel really at home in ministry spaces that are high touch and where we can really live life alongside one another very, very deeply. And like Jenny mentioned, I've carved that out, or maybe it was Doug who mentioned this, I've carved that out a little bit in my current call, and again, love those colleagues and people. But I'm excited for this shift for lots of reasons. One other reason is that you can imagine on a team of 8 clergy, there's like not enough preaching to go around. There's not enough of anything to go around for that many people. So we all have our lanes and our work that we do. And as it was mentioned, I do new member ministry, I do young adult ministry, some of our adult education and hospitality. And I love all of that, but I'm so eager for the way that this call would require more of me in lots of ways. And again, like bring us into community more deeply. And again, through the whole call process, I've gotten the sense that this place really lives out this call to care for one another, and I look forward to that richness. Let's see. Oh, a note about congregational ministry. In thinking about it, I think congregational ministry is at its best when it does 2 things simultaneously. The first, of course, is meeting the needs of and holding dearly and comforting those who are a part of this community. Church should be a place where you find refuge. Church should be a place where you need not check any part of you at the door. All of you is welcome at church. Church should be a place where we enthusiastically celebrate and affirm all who enter this place, and where we love each other really well. And church should also be a place where we are together transformed for something new. We know that God continues to call us towards something new together. And I trust that good work and good life in ministry is when I'm not only comforting and caring for people where they're at, but pointing them toward God's promise for new life, for reconciliation, and for liberation from all that binds us. Which is a lot of churchy language for basically a deep hope that what we do inside these walls matters not only for our lives, but for the sake of the whole world. And we walk that line every single day, tending to the needs that are right here within our walls, and tending to the needs outside of our walls, and like I said, tending to needs across the world as well. So a couple other things to know about me before I wrap up. I am married to Josiah, who is right here. I want to give a little wave. Josiah and I were married in July 2020. If you think back to when that was, it means that we had a little tiny COVID wedding in the woods at a tree farm in Anoka up near where we live. It was 10 people who were very socially distanced from one another. And when I married Josiah, I also got to commit to love my 2 stepchildren, Eve, who is 9, and Freddie, who is 6, who you will meet someday. They're not with us tonight. We share them 50% of the time with their mom. And so they are with us sometimes, and they are not with us other times. And you will hear that they call me Steph. So I have a daughter and a son, but they call me Steph. One of my favorite stories about that is when we got engaged and we were explaining to the kids like what that was going to mean. First of all, Eve, the older one, I have a dog named Parker. And when we told her we were engaged, She jumped out of her seat and her first question was, does that mean Parker gets to live with us? Yes, it does. And adorably, Freddie, who was 3 at the time, I think, yeah, he was little. We were explaining what this was gonna mean and he misheard. And for about 1.5 years, he introduced me to everyone as his stepmom. It was very sweet. So you will get to know them. Freddie is hilarious and sweet and funny. Eve is bold and brave and assertive, and my favorite part about her is that no matter what room she walks in, she is exactly herself. So you will know when she's here. And they are both excited to meet all of you and to become a part of this community as well. Josiah, I didn't say this, Josiah is a high school choir teacher, and he also coaches competitive show choir. So a bonus in calling me is that if you need a baritone soloist, you have them. Our family shares a cabin up in Ely, Minnesota. We love the Boundary Waters and canoeing and spend as much time in the Northwoods as we can. I'm on 3 boards. Camp, Voyagers Lutheran Ministry. I serve on the board of the Lutheran Campus Ministry over at the U, and then on the Aringa Committee for the Synod, tending to the Bega-Kwa-Bega relationship between St. Paul and our partners in Tanzania. And I think I'll end tonight by just sharing with you that, certainly from my perspective, this entire call process has felt incredibly Holy Spirit-led. I was not actively looking for a call when Bishop Lowe called me in early October and asked if I might be open to some prayerful discernment alongside the call committee and Pastor Jason. And like I shared with them in our last conversation, every step of this journey has honestly felt too good to be true. So know that I am grateful. And the more that we talked and the more we got to know one another, it became really clear that, well, hopefully there are a handful of gifts that I can bring to this place. I am so eager and excited to learn from you and to deepen my own faith as we accompany one another and to discern together where God is calling us and what it means to be the church specifically in this moment in time. So thank you for the invitation to be here tonight. I'll call up Pastor Jason for us to talk a little bit about what it is. The ELCA has 2 rosters, pastors who are called to word and sacrament, and deacons who are called to word and service. So we are both theologically trained, we both go to seminary, both serve through the call process. One of the ways that we often talk about deacons, like we heard in the introduction, is that deacons feel particularly called to the threshold of church and world. And so for me, that's meant that when I work in church spaces, my job is to make sure that the church has its eyes toward the needs of the world. And when I work in secular spaces, if you will, it's my job to make sure that the world knows the gifts of the church and that I sort of straddle that threshold in my life and ministry. We may also say that deacons are often, because of that threshold, deacons are often called to the margins, or to those who feel marginalized or left out of any particular place or system. And that's one of the reasons why I started seminary on the track to do word and sacrament. I thought I wanted to be a pastor, and I switched to word and service, in part because of that clear call to the margins that's articulated there. Some deacons serve in congregations. Many deacons do not. Deacons will often serve as hospital chaplains, or they might run a faith-based nonprofit organization in the town where they live, or do all sorts of creative ministry. Again, they're theologically trained, they preach and they teach, but I've always thought of deacons as the way that the ELCA as an institution sort of leaves the door open for some creative expressions of ministry beyond the congregation. And it's been a huge gift for me to see the ways that my colleagues, my deacon colleagues have done so. So that's a little bit about that.
So let's give a little context for what this looks like here, right? There might be some questions. And I think it's fair to say the role of deacon has not, as it is today, has not really been formed for very long in our church. We've had deaconesses, we've had diaconal ministers, we've had associates in ministry, we've had, which I could go into that, but there have been ways in which lay people have specialized for a long, long time. And I think as the ELCA is one of the most ecumenical, connected denominations in America, maybe the most ecumenically connected. And all of our ecumenical partners have deacons in some variety or another. And I think we've learned from some of our ecumenical partners what that actually looks like and how deacons can best serve the church today. And so it's been maybe 6-7 years since the ELCA voted at Churchwide Assembly to make it a roster and an ordained track. So deacons are ordained just as pastors are ordained. And as we've talked over the last year, it's been a year and a week since I was standing up here introducing myself, just to give you some time frame, right? Several people pointed that out to me in the last couple weeks. But as we've dreamed together and as we've talked together over this last year, we've talked a lot about discerning together at this time what it means for us to be the church, and to be the church here in West St. Paul, and to be in relationship with our amazing community partners and our amazing global partners. We certainly did all the discernment as a call committee to figure out what the best call was for us. And it so happened that a deacon candidate came our way, and we kind of looked at what we're trying to do here and what it might be that God is calling us to do. And it seems like having someone who has this perspective and these gifts and this deep sense of passion and call for not only the church but the world fits what we're trying to do, right? I'm hoping Stephanie gives me some bravery in stepping into the world, and that we learn together how to do that. Certainly, from her presentation, I have a theological and kind of professional equal. I don't think there's any question about that. And so I'm excited because I think that this is the next step for us as we look at what we're going to do, who God is calling us to be, what the ministry we're trying to do in this next season of our life together can look like. The role, whether this was a pastoral call or a deacon call, the role does not change all that much. Deacon Stephanie will still be responsible for overseeing discipleship and community mission. She will supervise our children's ministry, youth ministry, and adult education staff. So she'll work as a team with them. She'll work as a team with me and the music and the worship staff to shape our worship together. There has been some question about the sacraments. How do we do the sacraments? I'm still here. No, but I know that this is a congregation that's used to having multiple people who can preside at the table and do baptisms. And for right now, that will be my responsibility. I don't see that as a terrible burden. I feel a deep call to the sacraments, and we serve communion, we serve the sacrament, we share in the sacrament together. So I will preside, but we all share in it. It is shared ministry for us. If I happen to be out of town, we've got a few retired folks around here who are ordained, who may be willing to step in. And we don't know what God is going to call us and our staff to look like down the road. We have been at a congregation with 2 and sometimes 3 pastors. We have had a couple pastors and interns. We've had a lot of different configurations. And if you read my note on Friday, this is a congregation that is innovative and is seen by congregations in our area as someone to watch. And so I think we are taking a step into a different kind of model of ministry, but I think it's one that is ripe for really Spirit-led, Spirit-filled, and fruitful ministry. Any questions, thoughts about that? Dan.
Great question. Oh, the question was, what exactly would it entail for me to move from deacon to pastor, if that was something that I discerned? So thank you for the question. The sort of logistical answer behind that would be like a couple more classes of seminary and the candidacy process again. So basically I would go through a couple rounds of interviews with the synod office that would basically confirm that I do feel a call to sacraments. Right now I don't feel specifically that call for all the reasons I outlined about being a deacon, but I will say that I hold all of that with really open hands. And it is possible that someday I discern a call to word and sacrament. That's not how I feel right now, but it absolutely could be someday. And it would really be a matter of a couple hoops to jump through between the seminary and candidacy and some internship requirements. Yeah.
So it wouldn't necessarily be analogous to moving from a master's to a PhD, but a PhD to another PhD.
Yeah, exactly.
So just a quick anecdote. I finally found a doctor, because I moved this last year, right? And I went over to the clinic across the street over here, and I saw a PA. And I was like, oh, like PAs and doctors provide primary care. The PA filled my prescription. He asked me all the same questions that my doctors asked for the last 16 years at Mayo Clinic. And I thought, oh, it's a little like deacons and pastors. Slightly different education, very similar calls, very similar ways in which we can carry out the work that we're called to do. So yeah, it's just a shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Our church has a rich history of having interns. Do you have any plans for that?
I think I answered this a year ago. At this point, we don't have any plans because I'm not eligible to be a supervisor until September of 2024. You have to have 2 full years of ministry in your current context. So it's certainly part of the discernment process, I think, for all of us. And as we're looking at what God is calling us to do, what is that? Because I do know that not only do we have a rich history, but this is a congregation who lifts up leaders. We have had some tremendous interns, and this congregation has also raised some tremendous pastors.
Yes.
That is part of our legacy. Like, Augustana's fingerprints are all over the church because you have cared well for young people and raised them up to be leaders. So that is a commitment that I deeply have because I think there is such a gift. Whether it's in the form of an internship or something else, I think we'll continue to have those conversations. This is her meeting.
Other questions?
Could you give some examples of the kinds of outreach you did at St. Andrews?
Cue peoples.
Yes, he asked, could I give some examples of the outreach that we did at St. Andrews? That's an interesting question because like 2.5 of my 3.5 years were COVID. And so a lot of the outreach that we have done these last few years has been our online presence, honestly. So our new member classes that I lead about quarterly, we get about 40 to 50 people at with I would say like minimal advertising because people are able to access so much of St. Andrews resources online. So the backstory there is that when COVID hit, so we already had a little bit of like technology and stuff at church, but we hired a whole media team and like TV production and sound and all of those things, so that all of our worships are streamed online, all of our programming is streamed online, and it's made it really accessible for people, not just who are far away, but it's honestly made it pretty accessible for people who are older and whose health might be a concern and who were concerned about coming out during COVID, or even in the winter, like driving in the streets and that sort of thing. A lot of our outreach has been online. And then I will also say a big shift that we did in the last couple years here, thanks to an addition that we put on one of our buildings, is a lot of community outreach and offering our space as a resource to the community. So whether that's for community events or groups not necessarily connected to the church are able to use our building, and that just sort of deepens our partnerships and connections in the Matamidi area specifically. Right around our doors. A lot of the congregation commutes in from really far, which might, I hear, also be the case for some of you in this room, who come in from well beyond Matamidi in order to come to church there. And so that sort of partnering and offering our space to community initiatives has helped us just more closely know our neighbors. Just a couple things.
Pending the positive vote, when will you start?
Pending the positive vote, when will I start? The exact date, it's like the third week of March is kind of what we're thinking. So it's important to me to end well at St. Andrews and say some very cherished goodbyes there. And then have a little vacation in early March, and then it would be after that. So. Yeah. Yeah, thanks. So the question is like, how did I know how to close the chapter at St. Andrews? When Bishop Lowell called and we went through this process and started imagining this. I wasn't sure at first. I love my colleagues and I love the church that I serve, and the folks that I get to love and be loved by in that place. But again, I think for me, it became really clear, thanks to this incredible call committee, that this would provide opportunities for, like I said, like high touch ministry, highly relational ministry, where I could more deeply know everyone in the room and could hold one another's babies and eat in each other's homes and sort of tend to life together more richly. It's not that that can't happen at St. Andrews, it's just, like I said, it's been clear to me for a while that I want to be somewhere smaller. And yeah, it's not been without grief, for sure, in saying goodbye and sort of sharing this announcement more widely with that community. They are very dear. And it's clear to me, like I said, that this call would require more of me, and that feels professionally and otherwise just like a really faithful next step for me. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the activities that you may have done to bring the young adults back into your...
Yeah, she asked about activities I've done to bring young adults into the congregation. So I mentioned that we launched a young adult ministry at St. Andrews. We gather monthly on the third Sunday of every month, and then have a smattering of other events in there. So we've just sort of offered fellowship and community building time for them, and then also called them into leadership positions in the church as well. So folks who are hosting our online initiatives and that sort of thing, folks who are reading in worship or providing leadership in our worship opportunities. I've been really intentional in calling young people and young adults to do that. More broadly than St. Andrews though, it was mentioned in the introduction that about 3-4 years ago now, a group of pastors and I in Minneapolis started a young adult ministry that is Twin Cities wide, called Gather. And this is funded by a grant from the Minneapolis Area Synod. The Synod has a grant that is from congregations that have closed their doors. They take the remaining money from that congregation and then they grant it to innovative, creative, new ideas in ministry. It's like a gift that these congregations can give to the future church. And they gave us this grant to start this young adult ministry. And to be honest, what we sort of came up with in bringing this thing to life is that church is sometimes at its best when it's at its simplest. And so what we have done is every other month, we offer an evening contemplative worship service. It's kind of bluegrassy, it has guitar, and it's candlelit, kind of tizé, if you know what that is. And then immediately after, there's a free meal that we cater through Shobi's Table, which is a food ministry of the St. Paul Area Synod. And the simplicity of like setting that table for young adults on a Sunday evening and inviting them from different sort of pockets in the Twin Cities has really connected them with one another. And I think one of the reasons the Synod funded it is because what it's actually done is that it's connected young adults to one another and then connected them to congregations. So I can't tell you how many times over one of those meals, young adults have said, oh, I also live on that block. We should check out Emmanuel, or we should check out this church. And then it sort of brings young adults together to tend to them as a community, but it doesn't keep them in that silo. It sort of sends them out back into the congregations and into the work that's happening throughout both synods, the St. Paul and Minneapolis area synods. So it's like honestly fairly simple, but I think tending to young adults specifically and asking leadership of them for sure, but also creating spaces that are just for them and that are geared toward and speaking to the issues, whether they be theological or sort of in the world, that they really care about. Yeah. Yes?
How often did you preach on Sundays at St. Andrews?
Not super often. So thanks. Oh, how often did I preach on Sundays at St. Andrews? Not super often. And if you have looked, yeah, it was probably hard to find me on our like online worships. I preach about quarterly at St. Andrews. Again, there's 8 of us to share the preaching. But I did most of my preaching during like our Lenten series or our Advent Wednesday night series, that sort of thing. And then I preach for these young adult gather events and other sort of opportunities there. But Sunday mornings at St. Andrews, roughly quarterly, I would say.
Do you look forward to doing more?
Yes, yeah, I'm very excited to sort of stretch my preaching muscles a little bit. And from what I hear, you can confirm, once people are in a rhythm, it becomes maybe not easier, but you sort of orient your life toward these texts and this annual calendar of the church in a really meaningful way. So I'm very excited about the chance to preach. And I take it very seriously. I should add that too. Like, yeah, I understand the responsibility of preaching, and it's very important to me. How about the Bible? I love the Bible. I'm glad you asked. Also very important to me. Yes, very important to me. What I thought you were going to ask is what my favorite Bible verse is, if you're interested in that. It's Micah 6:8, if you know, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. You too? Yes, it's a good one. Yes, I believe it's part of that taking preaching very seriously is taking scripture very seriously and doing a whole lot of exegetical and other work to make sure that the preaching in this place and wherever it is I show up is well done, and that it is like worth your time to come and listen to that sermon, and that it's actually transformative in people's lives. Thanks.
How do you perhaps connect welcome and hospitality to the other side of sending? So, yes, that.
Yeah, that's a great question. How do we connect welcome and hospitality with the other side, which is sending out for the sake of the world in service? That's a great question. I think you're right that they're like very, very connected, both of those things. Some really good advice that was once given to me is that people can only be genuinely hospitable when they feel like they belong. And so it really helped me know that like my call was not only, again, to welcome people outside of the doors in, but to make sure that everyone inside the doors felt at home and like they belong as well, so that we can be proud and open to provide that hospitality. And yeah, I think that's exactly it, that they're very connected, that as we welcome and as we care for people, it is always for the sake of the wider world and what it means to live out our Christian faith outside of these walls as well. Yeah.
Will you talk about your belief on what the church's role is in terms of social justice issues and topics?
Yeah, what's my belief on the church's role in terms of social justice and topics? So I mentioned to you, that's been important to me for a long time and was really ignited when I was in South Africa. I believe very strongly that the church, that part of our call as Christians is to engage in faithful social justice work. I'm also well aware that we probably come at that from pretty different places, depending on our backgrounds and our beliefs and our political affiliations, that sort of thing. So you will hear from me from the pulpit and otherwise my own clarity about how my faith connects to things like justice work in the world. But you will also hear that from me in like a gentle openness to dialogue and conversation. I think that church is quite possibly the last place where we can sit in a pew next to someone who we might not interact with in any other part of our world and who we might actually pretty strongly disagree with on certain issues or certain things. And so it's a little bit of both. I have like some deeply held and clear convictions in my own sense of self and faith that I live out. But you won't hear those like hammered by me, if that makes sense. But yes, I think it is very clear to me that our truly Christian call is to social justice and to make sure that as we help to bring about God's kingdom on earth, that includes justice initiatives and looking intentionally at our systems and our structures and the ways that we care for people on the margins. Yes.
Okay, I have one more. Regarding music.
Yeah.
Music is really a very, very important part of our church,
Yes.
our ministry, and our worship. And I know the St. Andrews has the outstanding music.
Yeah.
What do you personally have that you can bring to outstand to enhance and support the value of music?
The question is about the, I was going to say, the question is like, music is so important here and also important in the congregation that I currently serve, and so like what might I bring to that? Definitely an appreciation of good music. I was mentioning to some of you that Josiah and I snuck in here and went to worship the Sunday before Christmas so that we could hear your, is it music festival? Music? Yes. Oh, it was so beautiful and we loved it. It was such a gift to be able to join you on that day. So it was incredible and we loved that. I will, maybe to answer your question, if I were going to church on a Sunday, I would go to a traditional service. I love organ music and hymns and the higher church, the better kind of thing. You heard me say I played in a worship band at Concordia and that sort of thing. So I also play guitar and can appreciate that sort of ministry as well. But in terms of my own piety and my own sense of faith, I tend to lean toward the traditional spaces. So yeah, I would say a deep appreciation of music and a willingness to be creative with how we bring that to life. So hear me clearly, an appreciation of the tradition. And I love old hymns. You have an incredible couple musicians here who I imagine are already stretching the congregation into new and creative ways of worshiping. Yes?
Speaking of creative worshiping, have you had experience preaching to windshields and honking horns at all?
Say more about that.
You didn't tell her about driving.
What? Oh, that's how you survived COVID. Oh, forever?
We have a drive-in service in the summertime.
A drive-in service in the summertime? I have no experience with that. But I will love it. I'm so eager to find out. Wow. How does that work logistically? Do you have you tune your radio? I've heard of this. Oh my gosh.
No radio station, you tune in radio.
Oh no. Wow. I have no experience with that. Sorry, I can't help with that. But I look forward to it.
It's a good sign.
Okay, good. Oh yeah. Is a honk the equivalent of like the church moo? Do you know what I mean? They're like, Yeah.
I might want to get a response from Doug on how he left it out of the.
It was not in your profile.
Just have a fun one. So every other year we have a very Scandinavian event called Holiday Coffee, which is Swedish, is 11 o'clock. And it's sort of some of ours that where you participate in this event really is very creative and artistic and Scandinavian. There's also a subtle point to it. It's whether your last name ends in S-E-N or S-O.
Really a solidly S-O-N up here. No, good question. Anderson is my maiden name. So Stephanie Anderson, and I am mostly Swedish with a dash of Norwegian. So that event will be very interesting to me. Josiah's last name is Telshow, T-E-L-S-C-H-O-W, like show and tell backwards, Telshow, which is very German. So we have different last names, but yes. The Anderson is with me. Any softballs? Anything else?